just imagine experiencing such an elusive, beautiful growl from a leopard right next to you. Well, I really don't know what that is, but our next guest knows this feeling very well, and he will be sharing his stories from tracking a herd of buffaloes to photographing lions. This episode we are going to dive in Matt's world, a park ranger in South Africa. Welcome to the Mossy Earth podcast. In this space we discuss nature restoration and how to help you reduce your environmental footprint. So tell us, how did it all start? What made you be a park ranger?
So I grew up in Johannesburg, South Africa, and we used to go on family holidays to the Kruger National Park and lots of different wilderness areas. The Kruger National Park in particular. So that was the place where I fell in love with the wilderness and animals and wildlife. And I think just from all of my trips there, I knew that that's where my heart was at. That's where I needed to work.
Matt's background is actually in finance and law, but I guess sometimes people's hearts just speak louder than degrees.
Yeah, I just wanted to keep my options open, but it was always my intention to become a field guide or a game ranger, as it's also known.
Yeah.
And I finished my studies and then I pursued my dream. I thought maybe I'd get it out my system and maybe would just do it for a year, 2 years. But I'm 5.5 years in and I still can't get enough. The only way to get rid of me is the coronavirus pandemic. That was the only way they were going to get me out of that place. Otherwise, I was going to leave.
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah, but it's me living my dream. This is what I've always wanted to do.
Yeah.
It's literally, when people say your job's not work when you love what you do, that's so true for me. It doesn't feel like work most of it.
That's so good. I was researching to see a few things about park rangers before talking to you, and the more I looked into it, I was like, what am I doing with my life? I should be doing this.
So lots of our guests say the same thing. They can't believe that they have whatever job they have. They all want to get the job that we have.
Yeah.
Look, there are some people that do say, when are you going to get a real job? Like, this is not a job.
You know what? From my experience, that means something great is happening. While you may or may not be about to fall in love with what a ranger does for a living, one thing is for sure, the landscape will most certainly take your breath away.
There's a lot of really big rivers that cut through the landscape across the length of the Kruger National Park. It's in the northeastern part of South Africa. It's one of the biggest conservation areas in the world. It's over 2 million hectares, close to 5 million acres big.
Wow, yeah.
The Kruger National Park is 360 kilometers from north to south. So there's some areas that are very dense. Generally, the vegetation along the banks of the river, it's very lush and green and thick, lots of evergreen trees, very tall, very dense canopies.
During our chat, Matt was telling me how a lot of the time when people pictured Africa, they tend to get transported to the Lion King and the open plains of East Africa, forgetting the diversity of ecosystems that you can actually find in this vast continent.
That's, I think, a lot of people's impression of what Africa is like.
Yeah.
The typical savanna, where there's grass and like a tree here and there. It's very flat. And it's true for certain parts of East Africa. And there are certain parts of the Kruger National Park that do look like that as well. Where I work in the southern part of the Kruger National Park, it's more known as bushveld, which is much more dense than typical savanna. There's like undulating hills. It's not as flat. You can't see what looks like forever. There's a lot of crests that you rise on and then go down into the next dip. Also with very tall trees, and a tall tree in that sort of landscape is probably like 10, 12 meters tall. So those are some of the really tall, big trees that could be hundreds of years old even. There's a tree called a baobab tree that you get in the northern parts of the Kruger National Park that can be thousands of years old. We have a a fig tree growing on the piece of land where I work that is 600 years old, and it's the biggest tree I've ever seen. I know there are bigger trees in the world. I think it must have a circumference. Sure, I think it was like 25 meters around. So I mean, it's huge, huge, huge.
Wow, yeah. It's quite hard to picture a tree that big because unfortunately it just isn't a common sight in most places around the world. But it really leaves you dreaming about the wonders of this landscape. And both field guides and park rangers are essential to their protection. There is a distinction between both titles. As Matt explains, a ranger is directly involved in conservation efforts through land management, anti-poaching initiatives, where a field guide plays the first line of defense when it comes to education. They will be the ones taking you on your next excursion.
I mean, it's used interchangeably. I mean, a lot of field guides like to be known as rangers. It sounds more professional. Yeah. So, as a field guide and ranger, you will also help with the conservation side of things. You are important in terms of that, but there is definitely a distinction. Field guide is someone that is taking guests on safaris, which entails taking them on a game drive, and we often take guests on bush walks as well, which is a walk through these kind of environments, educating them about maybe all the things that you miss from being on the vehicle.
For a ranger to safely take guests on a bushwalk, he must beforehand undergo multiple trainings until he knows how to behave accordingly when dealing with wildlife, away from the comfort of a vehicle. What you can hear in the background is a herd of buffaloes in the distance. One of the many trainings a field guide must go through, so one day I can take guests with him, is finding buffaloes on foot. The ranger carries an ash bag in his hand.
That's just all about being safe. So that little ash bag just tells us which direction the wind is blowing. And you never want the wind blowing from behind you towards the animals you're trying to view, because then they're going to pick up on your scent. So it's a very simple way of doing it. You can look at the very obvious features. So say there's a very strong wind, you may see the grass or leaves blowing in a particular direction. But sometimes it's quite still. So you need something to help you see the wind direction. So that's why that little ash bag helps you.
Yeah. Though the wind is not the only thing rangers must pay attention to.
You've got to take your cover into account. You've got to take how quiet you are into account, so you can view these animals safely. At no stage do you actually want the buffalo or any animal to know that you're there, because once they become aware of you, they may feel threatened by you.
Yeah.
And if they feel threatened by you, then they may feel like they need to defend themselves. And you never want that to happen, because then you not only endangering your life, you're endangering the animal's life at the same time. So it's a completely different experience being out on foot. And as a trainee guide, you need to experience lots of those encounters and spend many, many hours doing that, because one day when you got guests, you're going to have to know how to handle the situation.
Yeah.
And you watch their natural behavior, and the buffalo should never ever become aware of your presence if you're doing this correctly, which is an incredible thing to do, that you're in this animal's environment, but you can do it so sensitively that you don't change that buffalo's behavior.
Yeah, that's
it's incredible.
You really immerse yourself in the landscape.
Exactly. You move at the pace of the animal. You listen, and you kind of realize where you fit into the whole landscape, as a human being.
Yeah.
We only make ourselves powerful because of weapons and because of vehicles. Meanwhile, when it's just you walking out there, you realize actually how small and insignificant you are. I mean, most of these animals are much bigger and stronger than we are.
This is a reality that most of us won't come face to face in our lifetime. And those who do, well, they will be excited about all the little clues wildlife leaves behind. And a ranger's smile when finding thang on the ground is certainly something you don't see every day. Really, you're so immersed in the landscape and you're looking for these clues when you find one and you know exactly what it means. It's amazing to see the ranger just the smile on his face and like,
He's excited.
yeah.
Yeah, you know that the fresher the dung is, the closer you are to the animal. So that's why he was excited about it.
Yeah.
There's a game we sometimes play with our guests. The antelope we see are much like the deer that you might see in other parts of the world. So in North America or Europe, we find a lot of antelope that look like deer, and their dung are like little pellets. And there's a crazy game you'll sometimes play with guests. They cannot believe that this is something we get excited about too. But the pellets are dry, and all it is digested plant matter. So it's not dirty in any way. You know, there's no bacteria and any sort of filth in there. So you put it in your mouth and you try and spit it as far as you can.
What? People actually do it?
Some guests don't want to believe that it's a real thing, so they always want us to go first. But once we do it, you get the odd brave guest that wants to try.
Brave guests. How many brave guests have you had?
Yeah, I've had a few. They do think I'm crazy afterwards.
Connecting with nature while having a good time is pretty much paradise if you ask me. But what if something goes wrong?
So I guess that's why the training is so extensive, so you are prepared for any situation that might require you to act a certain way. I think there's always this misconception that animals are dangerous and just want to attack and hurt people. It doesn't work that way anywhere in the world. So it's not just specific to animals in Africa. It would be the same to animals in Europe or the Americas or wherever it might be. Animals don't see people as food and as something that they need to interact with. For the most part, animals are afraid of people. And it's just about making people understand that.
Yeah.
So for the most part, it's a very safe environment to be in and walk in and drive around in if you know what you're doing and you know how to read animal behavior. If you cannot read the signs correctly and an animal is feeling uncomfortable or is starting to become aggressive towards you for whatever reason, say it has a youngster in the area or it is injured, an injured animal could behave a little bit differently because it feels a lot more threatened and vulnerable. It'll never go from doing absolutely nothing to attacking you, but it'll give you some sort of indication that it's uncomfortable with you. And then you need to just behave accordingly. And if you behave in the correct manner and never make animals feel threatened, it's not a dangerous environment to be in at all. I've had guests say to me, I need to not take out some sort of extra insurance because it's such an dangerous environment in which you live. You know, all these animals could kill you and snakes could bite you and crocodiles could kill you in the river. And then I have to explain to them that whatever city you come from is much more likely to be dangerous. Somewhere with traffic and crime is much more dangerous than where we were. You'd be amazed how close big animals like lions and buffaloes or even elephants may get to our game drive vehicle, but they are completely oblivious to the game drive vehicle. They kind of just accept it as part of their environment. They are completely wild animals. They're not tame. They were never hand-reared. They're completely wild. But they have seen safari vehicles on numerous occasions, and they've been viewed sensitively by these game drive vehicles, and they've never been threatened by them, that they kind of just accept it as like another tree or rock within the environment at which they live, and they ignore it completely. You'll have a big male lion that will walk straight past the guide and a group of 6 guests, and he won't even acknowledge that you're there.
Wow.
And we are in open safari vehicles. We have no sides, there's no windows, there's no roof, and it is not dangerous if you are with someone that knows what they're doing. I think it could become very dangerous if it's a group of people where they don't know how to interpret animal behavior.
Yeah.
You know, and they don't know what they should and shouldn't be doing. Where because of the extensive training, it's not a dangerous environment to be in.
If we learn how to reconnect and understand wildlife better, wilderness can be a really safe environment, even when you are around leopards.
Leopards are probably one of the most shy, elusive animals on the planet.
Yeah.
Not so much because of their numbers that they're not seen, it's more just that they are very secretive by nature. And because of many years of persecution and hunting across the world, because leopards occur more than just in Africa, they occur up into Asia and different parts of the world, they are terrified of people because when they come across people, they get shot at or they get chased or they just have really bad experiences around people. And people fear them because they feel like if there's a leopard, it's going to kill your livestock or it's going to kill your child or it's going to attack you. Meanwhile, leopards are terrified of people because they just get attacked. But I can use where I work as a great example of conservation success is that the leopards where I work are also completely wild, but because of sensitive ecotourism, the leopards there have learned to trust us again. They are not afraid of people. They are not afraid of the vehicle. So here's one of the most shy and elusive animals anywhere in the world that trust us so much that they are also one of these animals that ignore us completely.
Wow.
When we're on game drive, they will literally walk right up to the game drive vehicle, not touch it because it's not something they do, and then they'll walk straight around it, not even look at you, and just carry on hunting, climbing trees, or doing whatever they normally do. And what a sign of conservation success when an animal that's usually so shy just accepts human presence like that. We can live with these animals. I've had guests say to me, we shouldn't be here, like we're intruding on their space. We're stopping them from hunting. And it's not true because that's just a perfect sign that we can live with these animals. They accept us, we accept them. No one hurts anyone. We don't hunt them, they don't hunt us.
Yeah.
And by us coming into the environment, we can protect them because by guests coming there, we can keep these wilderness places going. We can keep them running.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's really cool. It's all about education, really. The more Matt lets me into his world, the simpler it seems to understand that it all comes down to how we, as humans, perceive and understand the issues at hand. As much as we don't know how we can personally affect the lives of this incredible species, a simple informed decision to support the right organization when going on vacation can be decisive between a lifetime of incarceration or freedom for these animals that we dream about ever since we first watched The Lion King. So I'm eager to find out, how aware are most guests when it comes to wildlife conservation?
Most of our guests are very well educated, well-traveled people. To come to Africa on a safari is often not someone's first travel experience. Quite more often than not, they've been to lots of places in the world before they come to Africa for whatever reason they decide. So I think because we are getting a certain type of guest, a lot of it they have heard of before. They may not know that much about it, but they've heard about elephant poaching, rhino poaching, maybe the threats that some of the big cats are under.
It seems to me that only the most popular animals get people's attention, but the most popular not always mean the most endangered.
The most trafficked animal in the world is a pangolin. Pangolin is a scaly anteater, like an armadillo almost. It's the most trafficked animal in the world, but most people don't know about it. And that's an animal we very rarely see on safari. I've done this job for 5.5 years and spent my entire life going on holiday to these kind of destinations. And I've only ever seen 3 of them. And most people will never get to see one. They are very shy, secretive animals, but their numbers are extremely low. And they are the most trafficked and poached animal in the world. More than tigers, more than rhinos, more than anything else. But people don't know about those kind of things. So a lot of people are completely unaware as to them. But animals like rhinos, people know about them. I don't think they know the extent as to how bad the poaching is, but they've heard something about it.
So, what is it about certain animals that just capture our attention more than others? Believe it or not, sometimes people don't even know why some of them are on their bucket list. Have you ever heard about the term Big Five? Nowadays, Big Five refers to the iconic animals everyone wants to see on their African safari. So what animals make it to people's bucket list? The lions, leopards, elephants, buffaloes, and rhinos. But why these 5 and not some others? What do they all have in common?
So it's not the 5 biggest animals, it's not the 5 rarest animals, it's not necessarily even the 5 coolest animals to see. It's just this term that gets used and everyone wants to see the big 5.
Unfortunately, the term comes from the colonial period, and these were the 5 animals trophy hunters considered the most challenging and dangerous species to hunt on foot.
Yeah, I think most people are surprised about that. So it's more about ticking off the fact that you've seen the big 5. You don't know that there's so much more than that. And we always try and create an experience that is so much more than just the big 5. Like, you want people to tick that off. I think it opens their eyes when they realize how much more there is out there. How much more there is than just seeing a lion. It's about explaining how this whole ecosystem works together and how one species is so dependent on the next for this whole thing to function.
So, if sometimes we're not even sure why an animal makes it to our bucket list, I wonder how well people know the do's and don'ts when it comes to wildlife interaction. Sometimes the more we love them, the more we can hurt them if we're not well informed.
Unfortunately, in South Africa, using lions as an example, there's more lions in captivity in South Africa than there are in the wild.
Mm.
I think there's like 10 times the amount of captive lions in South Africa than there are wild lions, which is a serious problem because there's no need to ever have captive lions. They have no economic benefits other than for illegal reasons.
Yeah.
Where if we can protect the landscapes in which they live and we can protect the wild lions, we have a business model where it goes on forever, like it never runs out. For as long as animals are kept wild and kept protected, there will always be an opportunity for tourism.
Yeah.
Like, they're not going anywhere, you know. If we protect them, they're going to keep reproducing. And by protecting the lions, you're indirectly protecting the landscape. And protecting the landscape, you're protecting so many other species as well. And there's no reason for humans to interfere in their kind of behavior. The more we try and interfere, the more we actually mess up.
Yeah.
And I can use the Kruger National Park's management plan of the past. There used to be a lot more interference in terms of trying to help the animals in terms of providing them with water. So in times of drought, they'd provide them with water holes, which seems like the right thing to do because then these animals have water to drink. But then you mess up natural migration paths. Animals no longer migrate because there's constantly water in an area. And when there's constantly water in an area, they don't leave.
Oh.
And when they don't leave, it attracts more animals to that area, then they overgraze, and then there's more predators in the area, so they start putting pressure on some of the rarer species, and you just unsettle the whole system. So you think you're helping, but you're actually messing up in the bigger picture. So they figured that out now, and what they've started doing, they've started closing some of these man-made artificial watering sources and forcing animals to migrate naturally, which is what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
They're supposed to move from area to area looking for food and water. You know, we always think by helping these animals, but we're actually causing them more harm.
Yeah.
And we're doing more damage to the environment in which they live. Bears are not meant to be eating trash out of people's trash cans.
Yeah.
They're meant to be looking for natural sources of food. And when they start coming into our environment, that's when you get more human-animal conflict as well.
Yeah, true. Yeah. Yeah, I guess we don't realize how, well, even just a small action can have repercussions across the ecosystem.
For sure. It can even be something as simple as wanting to feed a wild animal. So around a lot of our lodges, we have a lot of resident monkey and baboon families. And they have grown to learn that the food at the lodges is delicious. And it tastes much better than the food they can find out there. But unfortunately, like, a lot of guests will want to feed these animals because there's a cute little monkey sitting at your feet and you've got this delicious food on your plate, so you feed the monkey. So they don't realize what kind of effect that can actually have too, because that monkey starts becoming dependent on humans for food. That monkey starts becoming a pest at the lodge, and when it becomes a pest, it loses its fear of humans, and they start jumping on the table and attacking people and biting them. And just from an action of innocently feeding a monkey a piece of fruit, can cause a huge problem at the lodge, and those guests are there for 2 or 3 days. They don't see the problem that it might cause.
Yeah.
So just a small action of feeding an animal something small. Hyenas often move around the camps in the Kruger National Park, and for some reason people think it's a good idea to throw some meat for the hyena to eat, like it can't find its own food. And then every single night you'll find the hyenas patrolling around the campsite waiting for food. How natural is that behavior?
Yeah.
A hyena's meant to be out there looking for its own food. Why, as humans, we think that's nice behavior because we're doing it for ourselves then. We're doing it for our own pleasure and entertainment as opposed to what's actually good for the environment.
Yeah, which is quite shocking as well, because you see, especially this example you mentioned, we see so many people feeding wildlife everywhere you go in the world, that there's monkeys, and it's just acceptable now. And it seems like there's not enough people telling everyone that this shouldn't be happening.
Yeah, for sure. And quite often those animals become problem animals. And when they're problem animals, sometimes we have to act and sometimes put these animals down because they become a serious threat to people that visit in the future. I mean, if you have a group of monkeys that become such a hazard to our guests because some people were feeding them, by us interfering and thinking we're helping them, we're actually signing their death warrant sometimes.
Yeah. I don't think anyone has any idea of the consequences.
No. It's very hard for them to lose that kind of behavior. It becomes extremely difficult without taking very extreme measures. In a lodge environment, even if guests are no longer feeding these animals, they've become so habituated to people and so unafraid of humans that they'll take the food anyway. Like, even if people are not actually feeding them, that they'll get what they want. So unfortunately, in some situations, animals will have to be put down or relocated. Quite often, the only way to stop the problem is to remove the animal, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Which is really sad. I mean, that's the last thing we ever want to do.
So let's pass the word around. Let's make sure people know before they become the source of a problem they may not even realize it exists. Protecting animals sometimes means keeping the distance to let them do their thing. And how great is it to hear Matt describing how comfortable these animals have become around human presence. But as any success story, I wonder if this new built trust is really just good news.
So most of the animals' comfort is from the vehicle. They kind of see the vehicle as part of their environment as opposed to seeing the humans on the vehicle. If you were to stand up on the vehicle or step out of the vehicle, the situation is completely different.
Okay.
So these animals have grown accustomed to us being in the vehicle as opposed to us walking with them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that is why we used to walk so much more carefully, because the way they react to seeing us on foot is very different to how they perceive us in the vehicle. The vehicle they've become so comfortable with, they don't mind it approaching, they ignore it completely. Whereas if you have to be walking, they do not allow you to do that. And the reason they don't allow you to do that is because of years of persecution and hunting and poaching, that they still see a human, someone walking on two legs, as a threat to them. It's incredible how different the behavior is. And you can actually see it. We always have to tell our guests to remain seated when they're on the game zone. So the lion or leopard may be laying literally meters away from the vehicle. You can talk, you can take photographs, and the lion does not even look at you. Should one of the guests stand up, that lion's behavior changes completely. Then suddenly it feels threatened. So that is why we ask the guests to remain seated, because then the lion starts seeing this as someone that could be dangerous to them. And that can lead to a dangerous situation. Not that the lion wants to eat the person. Lions don't see humans as food at any stage, but it feels threatened by this person. Then they might feel like they need to defend themselves. It's normally a last resort. Animal's first reaction is always to run away.
Yeah.
But if it feels like it does not have the time to run away, then it might feel like it needs to defend itself. So they have not grown to the level of comfort with us being on foot.
Okay.
And most poaching incidents would be people breaking into the reserve on foot, because they would not have access to the reserve in a vehicle, because there's restricted access. There's access points. And not to say that there's no poachers operating from a vehicle, but most poachers are coming in unbeknown to anyone through the boundaries of the reserve on foot, where they would be unlikely to be able to get as close to these animals as we can in the field.
It seems strange at first to think that one single person on its own would be perceived as a bigger threat than big noisy vehicles with a bunch of loud tourists on top. But I guess history just won't fade away that easily.
I think would be very scary, but because these animals have seen them so often and never had bad experiences with them, that should you approach even a sleeping animal, it doesn't even lift up its head to look at you because it knows what's approaching. It knows whatever's approaching is not going to hurt it. But the very same animal that you've approached in this noisy vehicle with noisy guests, if you were approaching it on foot and it saw you at 200-300 meters away, that animal would be up and sitting and watching you and thinking what its next move is going to be. It's incredible. It almost doesn't make sense, but it shows you like how you can break this barrier of acceptance with them.
Yeah.
I'm certain that if they had enough positive exposure to people even walking, their behavior would become the same to us on foot too. It's just very difficult to get that to happen, because as you approach them and at 300 meters, they're going to run away. So how do you get close to them again without making them feel threatened?
And without you feeling scared as well.
Well, for sure. So you'll literally have them right next to you. You'll be taking photographs. The guests are freaking out and you tell them, if you behave in this way, the animal's not going to react. We can watch him, natural behavior. Should we go walking? It's a completely different experience. Yeah. And that's why our approach to walking is very cautious. We're checking the wind. We don't want the animal to notice us at all. Plus, when we're in the vehicle, we don't actually want the animal to notice us either. It's not all about getting a good sighting and getting as close as you can. That's not the point of a safari experience. It's not about having the lion sniff the tire or being able to smell its breath. Like it's a wild animal. You give it the respect it deserves. Even though they're accepting of us does not mean we park a vehicle on top of it. If they choose to walk up and around the vehicle, that's their choice. That's showing us that they are comfortable with our presence.
How incredible is it to be able to watch wildlife's natural behavior so close without interfering? This trust literally means they are behaving exactly as they would should we have never driven by.
We're not watching them and they're watching us, like who's going to make the next move. That's not a nice experience for the animal, and it's not a nice experience for us watching them. It's all about giving the guest an experience and exposing them to the lives of these animals in this landscape without leaving a footprint. We don't want the lion to be bothered by us. We don't want the lion to growl because it's a cool thing. Like, we want his behavior to be natural. If he wants to sleep, we let him sleep. We don't wake him up so someone can get a picture of him yawning. If he's hunting, if he's roaring, good, those guests are lucky. But we don't interfere with the behavior.
But who wants to go on a safari not knowing if we will get the experiences we have been dreaming about? I guess being a true animal lover means putting these animals' lives in front of our own desires. Because those photos we've seen on Instagram, they just aren't scheduled. They just happen. And fortunately, there is still real wilderness out there.
Animal behavior is very predictable if you know what you're looking for, but you can't force them to behave a certain way.
Just think of it this way. Most people don't even ever get to see these animals if it's not on TV. Sometimes not even people who live right next to these incredible places.
Where there's a lot of conservation areas in Africa, a lot of those areas are surrounded by very rural communities. And they do not have the access to some of these conservation areas, which is very unfortunate. There's people that live around the Kruger National Park, as an example, that may have never seen an elephant in their entire life. They grew up in Africa and they've never seen one. And then we'll get a guest traveling from the United States coming on a safari for the very first time, and they see a herd of elephants on their first ever afternoon safari.
Yeah.
And there's people that are born in Africa, grow up in Africa, die in Africa at 90 years old and never ever see an elephant.
Wow. Yeah.
Which is really sad. And we're not talking about people that live hundreds of kilometers away. I'm talking about people that live next to the reserve.
Is there anything being done in that sense of trying to include the communities?
So more and more, there's a lot of job creation from those local communities. There's very little other job opportunities for them other than ecotourism and getting involved in the reserve. So that's why those reserves are extremely important to those communities.
Yeah.
But there's also a big effort into trying to get children on game drives into these reserves, like to educate them, to allow them to come see elephants, to allow them to understand why they shouldn't poach rhinos. Because, they'll be told at school, rhino poaching is bad, and they'll learn about rhinos, but we need them to come to the reserve. We need them to see the rhinos. We need them to see why we need to protect these areas and why we need to protect these animals. So there's more of a push for community involvement and educating these people. A lot of them probably don't understand. They can't understand why is there these big open spaces where they could graze cattle, where they could build more facilities.
Yeah, such a big part of conservation, just educating and including the communities. So what you're saying, they would be happier to just do something else with the land.
They would be. For as long as they don't understand why it's important to protect that land, they would much rather do something else that they could make money from.
Yeah.
It is all about preserving the natural world, because if we do, we can only gain so much from it. And the earlier we realize this, the better.
It's incredible that 100 years ago they decided to protect a tract of land as big as what it is.
Yeah.
Because back then, conservation and protecting big pieces of land was not a priority at all. So for the last 100 years it's been protected. There's actually more animals here now than there were 150 years ago. Because 150 years ago, people were just shooting animals and killing them and grazing cattle, and it was kind of just a free-for-all. There was no sense of conservation. I think globally, obviously, conservation areas are in trouble and animal numbers are down. But in the area where I work and in the Kruger National Park, I think there's more animals now than there were 100 years ago because of the amazing conservation work that's getting done and continues to being done. One of the ways they were protecting the rhinos in that area was by removing the rhinos' horns, to prevent poachers from coming in there to kill the rhinos for their horn. So you can remove a rhino's horn without harming the rhino. If you sedate the rhino, you can cut the horn off. It's like cutting your fingernails. It's made of keratin, and the horn does regrow. And in an effort to deter poachers from ever coming into the area, there was a drive to dehorn all of the rhinos on the reserve. So getting to be involved in those kind of conservation efforts was something incredible. Get to sedate the rhino and be there with it and assist. And to be next to an animal that's 2.5 tons, a wild rhino. So to be involved with that, you feel like you're helping in terms of saving these animals.
Yeah, that's amazing.
This type of conservation work is crucial to keep this beautiful species alive, which is all we want. Around every 2 or 3 years, as their horns regrow, their team goes back to cut it off to make sure no poachers get there first, as this is really the only thing they're after.
The rhino is actually worth nothing then. The horn is more valuable than the actual rhino. So if you take the horn off, no one's going to come there and try and kill the rhino.
Does it affect the behavior of the rhino once he doesn't have the horn?
So the horn is for protection against predators, against other rhinos. They do use it to fight. They do occasionally use it for feeding. So there are 2 different types of rhinos we get in Africa. We get a black rhino and a white rhino. Yeah. White rhinos are grazers, so they don't, which means they eat grass. They don't really use their horn for feeding reasons, where a black rhino is a browser and it feeds on the leaves and branches of trees. They occasionally use their horns to reach up and pull branches down towards them. So it could potentially affect black rhino feeding behavior. White rhinos, they need the horn to defend themselves, so do black rhinos. But if you dehorn all of the rhinos within the population, one's not going to be at a disadvantage over another. Now they both don't have horns. So sure, they need it for fighting, but they're both fighting with no horn.
Okay.
So it maybe does impact them too adversely because of it. And rather see rhinos and photograph rhinos with no horns, but at least they're alive.
Absolutely.
It's unfortunate because, when you think of a rhino, you think of its horn. That's what makes it a rhino.
Yeah.
But rather a stumpy horned rhino than no rhino at all. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, what happens to the horns?
So they're kept in safekeeping. Where exactly, I don't know. The trade in rhino horn is illegal. Who knows what's going to happen in terms of the trade of rhino horn? There's a lot of people on one side saying we should be harvesting the horn and selling it and kind of flooding the market with the product. And then there's others saying if you start doing that, you're going to start opening it up to maybe people that couldn't previously afford it because now there's a more steady supply of the stuff. It's not going to be as valuable, but then it might become more accessible to more people. And should you be farming something from a wild animal? But they are keeping it in safekeeping. They don't want the wrong people to get their hands on it.
Yeah.
Plus, should the ban on rhino horn trade ever be lifted, they're going to have this massive stockpile that they could potentially sell, and that money could go back into conservation.
Yeah, that's a complex subject, isn't it?
Despite the different views about what's best to do with the horns afterwards, one thing is certain: there is incredible work happening in order to prevent poaching. Day and night, rangers are working to patrol and check boundaries of these conservation areas, and many reserves are following suit and dehorning rhinos.
Because if one or two reserves start doing this and others don't, those that don't become a target then. Once poachers start figuring out that some rhinos have horns, that's where they're going to go.
Yeah.
So in an area, the reserves have to actually work together. There's a huge effort to try and curb this rhino poaching, but unfortunately the horns are so valuable that no matter what sort of presence you put out there or how much you try and stop it, there's always going to be a demand for it. And if there's a demand for it, there's always going to be people willing to risk their lives to try and get the product.
Wow. Yeah. So what it comes down to, demand. That's why education is so important.
It is demand, for sure. We need to educate people why and what is actually happening,
Thank you so much for joining us today, and a very special thank you to Matt for taking the time to speak with us and for sharing a little piece of his world. And just a quick reminder for our listeners, here at Mossy Earth we have our own rewilding and reforestation projects, which you can help support through our membership. By becoming a member for just £10 a month, you'll be planting 4 trees every month and contributing to the implementation of 6 unique rewilding impact projects per year. You will receive a photo and a GPS coordinate for each tree planted and have the right to vote on our project decisions. So, if you'd like to join our projects, head over to mossy.earth and become a member today.